I joke with some of my friends and peers that I hope none of my films are ever called timely or important. I just want them to be good. Sometimes when they haven't been tampered with too much, they can be. I want my work added to the canon of films I go back to year after year, but I could do without the comparisons. Wishing there were enough films by black filmmakers that audiences and critics don't feel forced to compare my work to a short list of black films or romantic dramas that have gotten their rightful due in the past decades. I cannot represent everything to everyone, and neither do I want to. I represent women like me when I'm at my best and writing honestly. Stella McGee, director of The Weekend. Hello, and welcome to Black is Not a Genre, a film podcast where we explore new perspectives on black genre cinema and discuss alternative narratives in genre film through a black lens. My name is Graham Cumberbatch, and this is episode 3. It is also the talkback for week 3 of our 4-part virtual film series hosted by Hyperreal Film Club out of Austin, Texas. All July, we invite viewers and listeners to watch along with us as we focus on a different black film in a different genre of cinema each week and discuss the film's impact and the contributions of black filmmakers to that genre. At the end of each week, we'll be airing a new episode of the Black is Not a Genre podcast featuring a great lineup of special guests. For week 3, we're discussing Rom-Coms and 2018's The Weekend, directed by Toronto's own Stella McGee. But before I introduce our guest for this week, I want to give a shout out to our consummate host, Hyperreal Film Club. In addition to presenting an eclectic mix of the world's greatest movies, Hyperreal Film Club seeks to build a special community around the moving image. They specialize in creating unique movie-watching experiences in unusual, thoughtful, and immersive pop-up environments. Hyperreal also amplify local artists by screening the pieces they've already produced, as well as creating paid opportunities for them to create and exhibit new work. They're always looking for collaborators, so whether you have a short film or a music video you'd like to premiere, or you're just looking to connect with other local filmmakers, hit them up. With us today to discuss the genre of romantic comedy, we have Dominic Jones. Dominic is a visual artist and performer currently based in Texas. She attended Columbia University in NYC, where she received a Bachelor of Arts in Film Studies. Her video work is premiered at Austin Music Video Fest, Babes Fest, Helmuth Projects in California, and Studiolo in Switzerland. She's also published video work and film reviews for online publications such as ID Vice Germany, Afropunk, Noisy, the Dallas Observer, D Magazine, and Fact Mag. So welcome, Dominic Jones. And we also have Jasmine Moreno. Jasmine is an Oklahoma-bred, Austin-based film programmer and grant writer, and the host of the Late series at Austin Film Society. Thank you for being with us, Jasmine. And lastly, we have Tyler English Beckwith. Tyler is a playwright, filmmaker, and actress originally from Dallas, Texas, and currently based in Brooklyn, New York. She's the recipient of the 2020 Leah Rand Fund for Emerging Women Writers and the recipient of the 2018 Kennedy Center Paula Vogel Play Prize. Tyler is also a member of the 2020 Page 73 Writers Group Interstate 73. Her plays include Mingus, Maya and Rivers, Bitch, and 28. The series of original films Tyler wrote, co-directed, and acted in, titled Umbra, can be seen on meowwolf.com. Her screenwriting work can also be heard on the upcoming scripted podcast Daughters of DC. Tyler holds an MFA in dramatic writing from NYU Tisch and a BA in African and African Diaspora Studies from UT Austin. Tyler hopes to create worlds in her writing where black women live beyond the basic means of survival and have the audacity to be autonomous. Thank you to Tyler, Jasmine, and Dominic for being here. Thank you for joining us on Black is Not a Genre. This is, again, week 3 of our virtual film series. We'll be covering rom-coms, or romantic comedies for the layman. We will also be focusing on Stella McGee's 2018 romantic comedy, The Weekend. Joining us today, we have Jasmine Moreno, film programmer and host of the Lates edition at Austin Film Society. Thanks for coming, Jasmine.
Thank you.
We'll also have Dominic Jones, a visual artist and performer, currently based in Texas. Welcome. Thanks for having me. And we also have Tyler English Beckwith, a playwright and filmmaker and actress, originally from Dallas, Texas, and currently based in Brooklyn, New York. Thanks for coming, Tyler. So, rom-coms. Let's start it off just by throwing out some of our favorite Black romantic comedies. Anything nostalgic, anything that springs to mind when we think about it. Who wants to go first? Let's go, Jasmine. You have any thoughts?
I think like the immediate one that comes to mind is like the GOAT, Love Jones.
All right, already the declaration. Cool. I like it.
I really, to this day, I still love quoting lines from Two Can Play That Game with Vivica Fox, and of course, like Morris Chestnut, who is in all like major Black rom-coms, Anthony Anderson, and also like a really great, bad girl villain. She is married to, what is his name? I'm forgetting her name.
Is Gabrielle in that? Yeah,
yes, Gabrielle
Union. Yes.
Yep.
Connie
Spalding.
That is one that I think gets overlooked a little bit, but it has some serious like Black rom-com institutions involved for sure. That's Chestnut, Union. Tyler, what about you?
I'd say Brown Sugar.
Okay.
Because it's like truly actually a comedy and funny and goofy in a lot of ways that I feel like some of the rom-coms that I think of, or Black rom-coms, are so much more dramatic when I rewatch them.
Yeah.
And I do place them in a genre of like rom-com. But Brown Sugar is like super light and like puffy and just it's just so airy in a way. There's like very little gravitas, which I think is useful. It's just funny.
And it's got that like iconic Erica and Common song like right as like the heartbeat of it. It's almost like the film was a response to the song.
Yeah.
Which I thought was kind of cool when it first came out. And I think that the sort of tension, or maybe even like the blurring of the line, is something that I kept running into when I was sort of writing this week's essay. Is like the traditional definition of romantic comedy that kind of blurs into like romance drama or dramedy, particularly with Black films, where it's like there's something that feels slightly distinct between like love and basketball and what is it? What's the one with Eva?
Deliver Us from Eva?
Deliver Us from Eva. Yeah, I was like, what's that Bible verse? Deliver Us from Eva. Whereas like, there's a distinct sort of genre bending in terms of like how much deliberate humor there is or how airy it is. And that's one of the reasons why I picked The Weeknd, not only because it just came out on Hulu and I feel like it's a good moment to support the film, but specifically because it was so airy in comparison to some of the genre. And I think there is a weightiness to rom-coms that sort of shows itself in particular with films with all Black cast. And I think for me, some of that maybe that carries over from previous generations of film, like pre-90s, where films like Claudine, where it was about the struggle of love. It's like a garbage a sanitation worker and a single mom on welfare. Whereas, there's an article that it was sort of came across in research and Glamour about, essentially titled like, "Where Have All the Black Rom-Coms Gone?" And they talked about the explosion of rom-coms in the 90s and the early 2000s, and how that was kind of mirrored by by more Black young people going to college, more like an expansion of the Black middle class and desire to see those sort of things play out on screen. So I'm wondering if you know, in that sort of transition, maybe there was a carrying over of drama, or maybe it's just something that, like, you know, black narratives and like the way there's a certain expression of these stories that lends itself to drama because we like it. I don't know. What do y'all think about that?
Well, I think The Best Man kind of does the best job of
Mm-hmm.
blurring those lines in, like, when it's dramatic
Right.
and when it is grounded, it's super grounded.
Right.
And when there's moments of like fear, it's very scary when he's hanging him over the balcony, like you really think that he might push him.
Morris
And then the
Chestnut is very
structure,
strong.
right? The structure is super. It's like a dramatic structure where it's like this betrayal of a best friend, and we get all
Right.
the flashbacks. But when it's funny, it is so funny.
Mm-hmm.
And like I can't remember the character's name with the locks and his like overbearing girlfriend.
He's another good like
and
underrated actor.
Falling in love with
Yeah.
yeah. But I know his name is Harold.
Julian. He goes by Murch in the
yes,
his Murch, like
yes.
Murkison. Yeah. Harold Perrineau is the actor.
Yes. So I know there's like all these moments that are like truly funny, but
Of course.
I think he does the best job of like really walking that fine line. I think I chose two movies with Taye Diggs, and I think he does that really well. He's just actually a very, very funny actor. I think in the other films, like thinking about Love Jones, I don't know if I've ever seen Lorenz Tate like have a comedic turn. And sometimes when I go back and watch like Menace to Society, Dog is hilarious in scary ways. I don't know if I've ever seen him like actually play.
He's not funny.
Yeah.
No, you're right. He's not.
Like, he's not. But yeah, no, that's one of those films that leans more toward drama than comedy, but it's still present, and it's like in the presence of like the friends.
The friends are great. The friends are great.
And
and I think go ahead.
That is much needed, because otherwise you would just have these two people just going back and forth and back and forth. So it really it livens that film up. But yeah, it's more leaning toward drama than anything else. I like how you mentioned also Taye Diggs, who was like the black guy in everything. Like it's like Taye Diggs, and like if Nia Long wasn't there, it didn't matter. Right. On the other side, you got Nia Long or Sanaa Lathan.
Of course.
That's it.
Yeah.
Of course.
You know?
You have all three of them in Best Man. I think it's
an all-star
of all of them. Yeah. I think also, I don't know if The Wood counts because it really is more of a movie about friendship.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of them are in The Wood as well.
They are.
Yeah.
Our group, which I think The Wood gets left out of a lot of conversations.
I love that movie.
It's so good. Such a good coming of age story. So I don't know if it like actually fits in a romantic category. But a lot of the all-stars are in that one too. But you're right. I think it's like that core, like this rat pack that we don't acknowledge. The Black Pack, yeah.
Dom, what are you thinking?
Well, I know that you were talking about how, well, I think for me, going back to The Weeknd, what I thought was like refreshing is that it was just a slice of life. I think that very rarely I've seen in the past, like, I would say like 5 years, where it's just a Black rom-com and it's not trying to be like artistic or intellectual or didactic or really anything other than exactly what it is. And I feel like she does a good job of doing that when it's just, you know, exactly like the title cards of Friday night, Friday morning, Saturday evening, Sunday. Like you just have this very casual timeline laid out for you. Right. And you know that it's all going to go down in this weekend. So there's like this time frame that's already set up with it. And yeah, I think it just allows itself to be exactly what it is. And I don't know, it does not explain itself. It does not, well, I guess, does it wrap up prettily? I mean, I liked that she gave the new guy the chance, honestly. Like, I was really happy for her being in an empowered state and doing that. But yeah, I guess for me, because going back into like my catalog, like when I think of like what kind of set the tone for like Black rom-coms for like, I would say like a good 20 years is Spike Lee's She's Gotta Have It. And I feel like that film was so artistic and very aware of itself, very intellectual and beautiful, of course. And I think that like even after that, like when Barry Jenkins he did his first film, I forget what it's called, but it's also like another Black rom-com slice of life kind of thing. It still was very artistic and, you know, just very intellectual. And I would say like an answer to like Noah Baumbach's rom-com, what is it, what did he call it? He has his own genre. It's like Noah Baumbach and Lena Dunham. They have like
mumblecore.
Mumblecore, yeah. That movie.
Sleepcore is sometimes accurate too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think we've come. I don't know. Just interesting to see how far we've come from Spike Lee. She's Gotta Have It. And now we can just be Black and be Black on a weekend. Cool.
No, I think that's good. And like Jasmine was saying, Medicine for Melancholy, Barry Jenkins' first film. I think that's an interesting timeline to set in motion in terms of She's Gotta Have It. I think there are a few echoes cinematically in The Weeknd. I think her framing and her patience with shots, her choice of music, a lot of it is very Spike-esque.
The music, yes.
The music is really dead on. And I think, you know, one of the things that Spike, I think you're right, Spike was, especially with movies like She's Gotta Have It and Jungle Fever, seemed very intent on whether admittedly or not making statements about the Black state of affairs when it comes to love and dynamics, and in a way that in a lot of ways didn't really age well, particularly because there were a lot of male blind spots and like didactic takes on how women are allowed to express themselves. And I think, you know, if we look at that and then we sort of see that on a line that connects through the early 90s with like films like Boomerang, and then as we were talking about like Best Man and all of those, there is a certain I feel like there is a certain tradition that The Weeknd fits in, and it has, I think Stella McGee has a particular perspective that, like you said, she's a millennial, she's absorbed everything from Love Jones to, you know, Larry David, and you can see a lot of like, even, you know, the Allen guy who shall not be named. I just don't really like him, but I think there are a lot of nice elements that she sort of pulled together. And you're right, she presents it in such a casual way that allows the characters to sort of be themselves without anything getting, you know, there's still a certain realness, but it's also not that deep. And she allows the characters to sort of exist by themselves without necessarily being goofy, but without also taking themselves too seriously, and without like a ton of like expository backstory. I mean, I think she does a really good job of keeping all of their footnotes or their bullet points really tight and just lets them be funny. I think Sashir there are some reviews I read that I think, particularly one in particular that I'll maybe mention later, but about, you know, whether or not her humor comes across. But I personally thought she did a brilliant job, not even necessarily in this sort of like crafterly way, but there's a way where she just like, I thought her delivery makes so much sense for her character. Like I really recognized her. I don't know what you guys thought about that in the context of how Stella McGee is sort of framing the rom-com, or if there's anything that stood out to y'all about that.
Can I be a little controversial and say
yes,
that
of course.
I don't think that Stella McGee is even working within the framework of Spike Lee or even a Barry Jenkins. It felt very much like in the tradition of that man with the last name Allen in an Annie Hall kind of way, and also Nora Ephron seemed to be like her biggest influences.
Myers.
Right.
Nancy Myers too. Yeah.
Nancy Myers for sure. Even though not a great kitchen, and I kept thinking about that every time they went into the kitchen. I was expecting a better kitchen, considering
it was very
how beautiful the exterior shots were. Yeah, the exterior shots were gorgeous. The interior shots left a little to be desired. But yeah, I felt like she was more in the tradition of those early 80s, late 70s rom-coms, even with like how soft a lot of the colors were. They're like, when I think one of the characters mentioned someone wearing pink, and it barely registered as pink to me because it was so muted. I think a lot of that is much more in that tradition than in Spike's or even like Barry Jenkins. It came across
I actually I agree more with you. I think that the only kind of thing I saw that was I could have pulled from Spike was the music, the constant jazz, right? But honestly, like her jokes were more crafted in this like, Larry David, Seinfeld, like we're gonna make a whole bit about this strawberry jam right now. Like we're gonna make a whole bit about, nothing essentially. So yeah, there is the Allen films. I was trying to figure out what other pacing it was like really reminiscent of for me. But
what are you gonna say?
It was definitely, if you switched out all these black faces, I mean, you could easily do it. You could easily switch those people out. And like, not that I would want to, but you can. And like, that's sort of what makes it, there's a universal quality to it. It's very relatable. And as a programmer, I've once heard another programmer say, in all seriousness, if I play these black films, how's my white audience going to relate? Like, how's my white audience going to relate? And
I can imagine them saying that, yeah.
No, it's this film in particular. It's like, there's no way you can't relate. Again, it's very, he who shall not be named. It reminded me a lot also of like Obvious Child, which came out like
the Jenny Slate film.
Jenny Slate.
Yeah, it had a sort of vibe, and I think also it's like acerbic, like lead.
Highly.
It's not flexible. Like, if I'm gonna be completely real, like you're like, she's kind of foul, right? Like, you kind of like, you don't.
She was so cringy to me. For me, she was very cringy. It was very cringy, very self-loathing. But now I know what it reminded me of. It reminded me of Greta Gerwig. Greta Gerwig's her humor and her comedy and her pacing is very similar, and she has an equally self-loathing, like who could love me? I'm just this curmudgeon-y but cute and like thin white girl. And I feel like she's I don't want to say this, but like Sashir is like this other version of that where it's like I don't but I don't know.
I think it's also the comedian.
Yeah.
Like, the character of a comedian, which is always like self-loathing. Like, I've never seen any character that's like a comedian that's like, I love myself.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Myself. That's why I get on stage and make fun of my entire life and everyone else.
Which is why it's so Woody Allen, honestly. But I think what was missing for me from that character, from the Zadie character, that is present for me in Annie Hall or present for me in Frances Ha, is that it feels like Zadie doesn't want anything. And or she's not good at anything, or she doesn't have a place in the world. And I felt like that vibe was coming from the mom when she sees her, and she's like this mom who like is super opinionated, which I love, and you know, she's not exactly doting, but I felt like she would have lines about, you know, like, you're almost 30, you need to grow up, things aren't what like a fairy tale, or you can't just like tag along with your ex-boyfriend and his new girlfriend. And so I'm wondering, like, if the conceit is that grand that like any person alive would go on a romantic vacation with their ex-boyfriend and his current girlfriend, what is it that they want out of the trip? And also, what is like the state of their personal confidence? And I felt like that was missing a little bit for me, which, because I'm fine with unlikable, I thought she was funny sometimes. Sometimes the jokes didn't land exactly, but I'm wondering how does she function outside of this relationship? Not because the movie's about the relationship, not saying that she has to function, but like, what does she want in the world, essentially?
Yeah.
I was gonna say that's actually what I kind of like, that she's as messy as she is. Like, she's messy, and most of the time in talking about all of these other romantic comedies or just Black romances in general, I think often we're always professionals.
Yeah,
like from like you know, late 90s on, it's like, again, it's that idea of upward mobility, and now you're seeing the Black middle class, everyone's a professional. And even in things like you know, Insecure, I think that's what kind of makes it unique, is like Issa's a mess, right? You know, but like Issa's a mess but with friends that are doing much better, so she can't be that much of a mess, right? But this character, you're like, I mean, like,
it's really pitiful. Like, it's super pitiful.
I think that's interesting, because I think the biggest, for me, someone who is just like, just a very laid back, almost to a fault, I think there's a huge dearth of slacker comedies centering Black characters. And I really felt like this was like, it positioned a sort of a slacker, almost like a character that would have been like a stoner Black best friend in a white rom-com, and it like gave her own movie in a sense. And I think I do think that there was something missing as far as what her character's motivation was, but I also felt like, for me, there was something slightly comforting that, you know, we might see something intentional in that we find this character in a moment where she has no idea what her motivation is. She's stuck in this sort of stasis between not being able to get over her ex and like not really being like we all do, sort of immediately feeling infantilized with her mom, not understanding the ways in which her interaction with her mom is problematic versus her dad, who seems to dote on her incessantly, but not really having any sort of retort, because like you said, she doesn't know what she wants, so there's nothing really that she can respond back to. But I think there is, for me, I feel like there was a certain lightness involved in that, you know, she wasn't someone, you know, the character, like you said, who's very professional, who has a plan, because so often these movies, and this is kind of across the board, like the central female character and love interest is someone who has it all together, super type A, did this, did that, and then this like this like slacker, carefree, handsome dude comes in and throws her life into a disarray, and she realizes that she just has to let go sometimes. And like I think there is a certain subtle way, and whether or not it's 100% successful, I don't know, in which The Weeknd is subverting that a little bit. I don't know what y'all think.
Well, I
like that.
With slacker films, they have delusions of grandeur. Like they don't necessarily have the motivation to do anything, but they're like, if I were to get off this couch, I would be the funniest or whatever. And I feel like not necessarily that the movie has to be about that, but I'm wondering, like, how does this like change her functionality? Like, what kind of person depending on what's going on with their lives, would do this, go to their parents' house on a weekend with their ex.
Who is she?
I think I guess I'm having a little bit of trouble with the concept, considering that we don't really learn much about her life outside of relationships.
I definitely think it was.
Sorry. No, I think it could have been a line or anything, like not a scene or, you know, a backstory or flashback, but something small.
Yeah, I think it was very much like, we're going to get 5 actors, we're going to give them this, like, you know, these wants, needs, whatever, and this is the problem. And like, I don't know, I just felt so, and I agree with you, like, what had to have happened to her, like, all these past years for her to make this decision that was just so self-harming in a way. Even if she had said, like, oh, I'm a comedian, you know, I do this shit for material, right? Like, this is just my research. Like, even something like that could have, like, satiated a bit, but it was like, I don't know, like, maybe the writer was like, I've got this time frame. It's kind of, it sounds strange, but like, I don't know why I'm getting this image of, you know, Friday, the movie Friday, where it's just so simple. It's like, Friday, we have to get $200 to Big Worm, or everything's gonna like crumble. Like, it's very simple. And I feel like this was very similar in this, like, this is a weekend. We have to, you know what I mean? And she was just like plugging in these, like, some of the parts felt plugged in.
Yeah, I like how self-contained it was, because ultimately, again, like I said, like, it could have been any little indie movie, right? Like, any kind of cast. And it could have been like, you know, anyone. And I think what makes it interesting is that, you know, like, I feel like that's sort of a thing we see a lot in comedies with, like, white cast.
Yeah.
And we're very used to just, like, they don't do anything. You know, we have no idea, like, oh, the character works at the coffee shop and they deserve love too. I guess we got a whole, you know, like The Nanny. I think there's like a Johansson movie where she's just a nanny. It's like, she can find love too. But like, when you're Black, this sort of like, you have to be amazing to find love. And even then, if you're talking about that, it's like, there's often this sort of thing of like Black women going through like all of these changes in service of a man, or in an attempt to get a man, right? Like, it's like, I have everything else, but I'm missing love. Right? And so this idea that Black women can't have it all, and in this case it is sort of a subversion, in that it's this Black woman who really has nothing
Exactly.
Like,
it was great,
and it made me frustrating, but I love it, because it's like, you don't see that, like, Black people don't just get to just be like not great. like, you know, I think that sort of idea of like Black excellence all the time, you know, this sort of like, I don't know if you saw, like, Being Mary Jane, very like put together, Gabrielle Union's got it all together, but her love life's a mess, right? And there's always that sort of thing. And so I like that this character is an entire mess. And it's refreshing to see. And I think, like, mentioning Medicine for Melancholy earlier, it's like, they're also sort of like, I mean, they just
meandering through life,
riding their bikes. I mean, like, you have no idea what they do really or anything, and that's perfectly fine. You know, they look like they work at a coffee shop or a juice shop or something, you know.
Something, just vaguely something. Vaguely employed is generally,
It's very like Adam Driver, like, where he's always just like there, and like, I don't know, like, what, like, he's like, he's like this tall guy, and he's just like, but you want him to have everything, and you're just like, I don't know why I want you to have everything, but I do. I have no clue what you even, if you even want that for yourself half the time. Like, have you taken a shower today? Like, it's just this, we give so much so easily to these, like, to the white characters without any sort of I guess it's speaking like more broadly, we allow them to have so much more, dare I say, color, even though they're so bland. That's the irony, is that we let them have so much more color, and paint with such broad strokes. And so even though I found Zadie's character so cringy, and some of the jokes didn't land, there is a necessary place for her in our cinematic legacy, I would say.
I wanted more of those moments of her being alone and being so awkward and like weird in her body. Like I love when she's practicing talking to Aubrey in the mirror. I love
really good.
It felt like it just felt like something someone would do. I love the moment after they're racing bikes and she's trying to like configure herself on the ground on her jacket in a way that is comfortable but also maybe cute. Like all of those physical moments where it feels like she's like a person in her body and not just like a witty, comeback. It feels so much more true to me than like the dinner scene with like the cuts, which I liked. I did. There were like certain moments of the dinner scene that I love, and I love the running gag of no one ever knowing when she's joking or not. I think it really works, and it works especially there because she is being mean purposefully to Margot, and trying to confuse her about when it's a joke. But I think those moments, like when they're in the back of the car and they're trying to make out, but it's not enough room, like those moments feel so much more of like her actually being a person than just being like a generative, like witty line return.
I agree with that. I wish there were a little more moments. It did seem like there was a rather intentionally not a dichotomy between Zadie being her naturally funny self and Zadie performing as a sort of crutch to deal with this sort of anxiety of the situation where she's just, you hear that a lot about comedians where like they're always, they tend to go into this go mode sometimes, or this idea where they're always on because they don't really know what to do sometimes in certain situations if they're off. And so like it definitely seems like there was kind of her, and then there was her that needed to protect herself by just literally constantly making jokes, whether or not they bombed or not. There was a sort of self-referential line in the conversation when she and Aubrey, played by Elal, what's his name? Elan. What's his last name? He played Daniel from Insecure, who I actually think is quietly good in this.
I think all the performances are really good. I really like that boyfriend. I think his name is Tone. I've seen him in something else.
Yeah, and I can't remember what that is, but he's
good. He's really funny.
He's funny. He's funny as like the kind of low-key villain of the movie. Like he never stands up for his girlfriend. He's been leading her on and being wishy-washy for the whole time. And I think, to your point of, she was talking about the running gag of no one ever knowing she's joking. It's like there's that element where she's intentionally toying with that. And then, we kind of get a little bit of her insight in that when she's talking to Aubrey on their walk, when she says, he asked what she did. And she goes, well, I'm a comedian. I thought I told you. And he's like, oh, I thought you were joking. Yeah. She says, no one ever takes me seriously. And he's like, is that true? He says, well, maybe, I don't know, I guess maybe it's an occupational hazard. And so she makes sort of direct reference to this idea that, not only she kind of shows the soft underbelly of that, of the armor of not making sure no one ever knows if she's joking, and the fact that that can actually be sort of debilitating or stunting in a way where it's just like sometimes you want to be taken seriously and people treat you like the girl who cried wolf. Go ahead.
And that also plays into this sort of idea as well of she's not your typical lead, right? Like that idea of her being the sidekick, which is talked about, which it's like, yeah, no, she's the sidekick.
In that
you
same scene,
never get a movie about her at all, and that's what makes it very unique to me. Is like, this is the sidekick, this is the sassy friend.
Right.
You know, this is the friend who tells someone like, oh yeah, guess you need to get your life together. But in her way of saying that, it would just be some really dry joke. But it is the friend you would never hear about, who's only there to listen to typically like their white counterpart go on about their lives. So in that way, that alone makes it like very interesting to see like the sidekick get the, you know, be the lead, but to also get not just one man but two.
Yeah, it was the framing. There was that one part where, sorry, I was just saying that stood out to me so much that that was like, who is like, this girl has like literally two guys trailing behind her. There was the framing wherein she's just like looking at them go, and it's just like, I don't know, like that framing was just so great because it was just there was just no guessing of it. They were both after her, like this is what that framing stands for. And
she's not no prize either. And that idea of her being sort of messy and what such, it's like, she's not really like, if you're going to pick between two women, you don't choose her, you know, and that's kind of the thing. It's like, let's be honest, you don't choose her, right? But yet here she is the one who wins, you know. So I like that. Like, I really love that. I felt seen, is what I'm saying. This movie, I felt very seen. She may be messy, but I felt seen.
That's great.
I'm glad that they didn't fall into the I mean, like the women were of course pitted against each other, yes, but it wasn't about types. There was only one comment where, I mean, I felt like a hit dog whenever she was one of her for liking Real Housewives.
That was harsh.
Real Housewives of all the cities. But other than that, I think they took Margot very seriously, and she wasn't ditzy, or she wasn't dumb, or she wasn't like, I feel like in a lot of rom-coms lately, there's like the super millennial, like vegan, or like she wasn't like self-obsessed or whatever, to combat her like narcissistic, witty, self-deprecating type, which I felt really worked, and is what actually makes the boyfriend the villain, because Margot's a real person. And when she's talking to him about the engagement, you like actually feel like they were in a relationship. So I thought that was like super well crafted. And I will say I was expecting that, just as someone who loves rom-coms. When she first comes on the screen, they had that funny bit with the window, and I was like, oh, I kind of get, like what her type is gonna be, and it wasn't. So I was really glad that they subverted that, them pitting each other, being pitted against each other.
What were we gonna say?
Well, I feel like what was her name again? Margot? Is that she's Margot, the other girlfriend? Maybe this is just me, but I was just like, why can't she be both in this? I don't know. I was curious as like how they got together. I would have actually loved to have like heard about like when he met her, and what about her made him be like, whoa, like I need to get with her. I need to leave Zadie and get with her. Because the more they talk, you realize, like, I'm like, these people don't have like really anything in common. Wouldn't they have seen that? Or wouldn't that have caused this friction or tension to where, I don't know, that was really interesting to me. And so that made me wonder, well, maybe she is funny, and maybe this is just not she's not just shining right now. Maybe like she's just in this like fraught, tense moment because she's with the ex-girlfriend. I mean, how funny can you really kind of be? Like, yo, like I had to think to myself, if I show up my boyfriend is like, yo, we're gonna take my ex-girlfriend, that's not gonna fucking happen. Like that's just not a trip that's gonna happen. You know what I mean? And so I don't know. That was just like I don't know. I was like, Margot, I think there's just more to her. And I wanted to see what that looked like, but maybe we just didn't have enough time in this weekend, you know? And I have to like be okay with that.
Yeah, I think like in any other, like we're talking about some of these other Black comedies, in any other Black comedy, Margot would have been the lead. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Margot would have been the lead. And, you know, you would automatically go like, oh, Zadie is awful. Like, this is Margot's movie. That would be it.
Zadie's
and
awful.
Margot wins. But yeah, I think in talking about, I mean, this film is, you know, what I really love is it is a complete subversion of all of those tropes that exist in specifically Black romantic comedies, which are very different and very skewed culturally. That are, you know, our tropes are, you know, sort of, we've got a lot of misogynoir and the idea of like a woman constantly like having to prove her worth, you know, and Zadie doesn't do that. Zadie's just like, take me as I am, you know, like the moment where Margot says like, why is Zadie wearing a man's shirt and yesterday's eyeliner or something, you know, it's like, she's a mess. She's totally a mess. She's not put together at all, you know, and she's allowed to just be that. And the only one who gives her any grief is her mom. And I think that was actually, out of all the relationships that you see play out, I think that was the strongest relationship and the strongest aspect of the film, really.
Yeah.
Let's speak about Kim Field. Is it what's her
Kim
name?
Whitley.
Kim Whitley. Oh my God, Kim Field. Who's also another like awesome icon.
She's incredible.
At some point.
Say what? Say it again.
A former Real Housewife as well. So
right.
It's all together. It's all circling back.
It's just, I mean, it's the birth of all art. Just the nexus of 6 degrees of Real Housewives.
Kim Whitley, her character in this, I saw a few aunts, you know, in her character. I saw a few Black elders that, you know, resonated with me through her character. And I mean specifically in terms of, because she said, you know, she's going through a divorce. Kim Whitley is going through a divorce. They both, her and the father, have not told Zadie apparently. And so she's trying to, even at 30, almost 30, trying to keep that from her and doesn't feel like she's able to share that and to speak her truth. But also this, you know, her being like, you kids are just wasting your life being young. Like, you know, you need to just, you know, let loose or whatever. There's that sense of regret, but also familial duty, and how she hung in there until Zadie was almost 30, pretty much. I don't know, I like rambling. Do you know what I mean? Like,
no,
I don't know.
She serves a really important purpose in this film, and like not only is she just brilliant, and she is, I think on multiple levels she's important. One, because she's Black famous, so she's someone that Black people will instantly recognize. White people don't know who she is. I think the most mainstream notoriety she had was on the Thanksgiving episode of Master of None, which she was also great in. But she's been in Next Friday. She's been in Delivers from Eva. She's also been in a lot of white rom-coms, playing these other side characters like Along Came Polly, Fun with Dick and Jane. She was also in she was in I Love You Man. She was also in Black Dynamite. I think what's cool about her is that she is a rom-com.
Was she in Soul Plane?
Probably. I'm looking at it.
Everyone made a cameo in Soul Plane.
She might have been and just was like uncredited because she didn't care. But yeah, I mean, I think what's cool about her is she's planted there in this role, and she has her real life history bringing along with him, that she's a rom-com veteran. And so there's a way in which she kind of plays the previous generation of Black women in rom-coms, whether that's stuck in a best friend role or like even maybe Zadie's mom was the lead in her own rom-com and feels this pressure to keep her marriage together, and because there's a lot of, and feels pressure to force to sort of encourage Zadie to like put herself together and like be this sort of type A rom-com lead, or else you're not going to attract a man. And so I think that interplay is really central to the film. I actually think the whole film falls apart without that relationship. And I think the way Kim Whitley plays it, you can see where Zadie gets her sort of caustic, zero filter sort of personality, and you can see where her mother is doing this out of care, and you can also see sort of certain scars in which it, like the way in which she relates to Zadie has maybe actually contributed to her like stunting her growth as an adult, and her sort of inability to muster up the sort of self faith to move on from this relationship. But yeah, I mean, if y'all want to gush about Kim Whitley more, feel free.
I mean, in the same way that Jasmine talked about feeling seen before, I felt seen in that relationship with like a mother who has probably pushed her daughter to be as like weird or strange or like unlikable and funny as possible. But when you are almost 30 and you're not married or you don't have children, which is not strange maybe for white people, but
right,
Black people settle down early. But that's not strange for white people, because I actually just watched a white rom-com, Something Borrowed. And I think it's about this like pressure around age 30. It's a pressure age for women in general.
Yeah,
I think
30. Yeah, so I think that there's this like fear with the mother character when she says like you're wasting your time being young, and also going through her own divorce where she's like, you know, if you want to have a life or start a life, although I've pushed you this long and this far to be whoever you want to be for as long as it takes, biology is still biology. And if you want to have a child, sometimes you have to like move that process along quickly. And I think she like just wants her to be happy, and maybe she does equate that with romantic love, and maybe she's feeling nostalgic as she's packing up her husband's things. But it feels like it's coming from a place that's so caring, which is why I love that mother so much, because she's not gonna be like, I love you so much, give me a hug, give me a kiss. She's just gonna like tell her the truth, so that she feels it. Yeah,
I think that like what I've seen of Black motherhood and Black grandmotherhood throughout Black cinema is I mean specifically Black cinema, it's this tough love of, you know, like, this is how I'm going to show you I love you. I'm going to give you the truth, girl, because no one else is going to tell you, right? Like how it really is. It's kind of like what I get from like soul food and the lessons that she bestowed upon everyone, and that she was still teaching them beyond her death and everything. I think she's like a really good example of that. Just like that hard truth. I thought it was actually really poignant that they didn't go into specifically why the marriage broke down. There was no like blame. There was no victim or villain of it. It was just like a marriage that simply stopped working. Yeah. And it was just as boring and as tragic as that. You know what I mean? And I feel like
the line that she says, something about like when you've been married for 30 years, it's not going to always be on the incline. I love
that. Was like, that was as far as she went with it. And she didn't like bash the father, and she didn't, I'm glad that the writer didn't play into any of that, like kind of like just, it would have been just too easy, right? And the guy's not there to defend himself, obviously. So it would have been too easy to give us that, oh, well, he was caught cheating, or like this happened, or da-da-da-da. It was just like the marriage just didn't work. And I think that's what made it even more solemn, because you never know. It's a crapshoot then. If your marriage didn't work after whatever, how long, let's just say 30 plus years, then it's a crapshoot for any of us, right? Like, I don't know. That made me feel like, oh, damn, like, that's how it is. Like, so
I liked their approach to that. I think, juxtaposed to films like Love and Basketball, I think they did a really good job of depicting, a grown child whose parents are growing apart, and illustrating that in a way that didn't just like shatter her faith in her parents as people, which is in a lot of ways unnecessary, because that's not how things happen in real life. And I thought there was a really nice element of that. And I think, before this week, Hyperreal wanted to post some other some other rom-coms that had kind of been mulling around. And one of the films I thought about in approaching, I actually watched it. It's not, it's rough. It's very much like an early 90s indie with like sort of mistakes and all, but it's Have Plenty. I think it was 97. It was a small film made by, what is his name? Hold on, I have to Google it real quick. The man's name is Christopher Scott Sherrod, and he made it for a tiny budget, I think like $65,000. It got picked up by Miramax. He wasn't supposed to be in it, but the guy who was supposed to play his character dropped out. He ended up getting Babyface to produce it, and Babyface actually did the soundtrack, which is really exactly as good as you would think a Babyface soundtrack is. And Hill Harper's in it, and then several people that I don't really recognize, but there's some cameos, because it's about a writer who, and I thought about this because the vibe is very similar. It's very, very much rooted in this sort of like mid-90s indie scene. You could even call it kind of a mumblecore precursor. It's a young, struggling writer who's basically homeless. He's house sitting for this woman that he went to school with, they're friends, but he has a deep crush on. He's trying to get this book deal. He ends up going to her mother's house for New Year's Eve. Her sister and her husband are there, and then her friend from high school, and they all just kind of hang out, and messiness ensues. But the sort of pacing, the sort of rough cuts, the very sort of laid back, and like you were talking about, the sort of meandering, minutia laden conversations that kind of just like sit there, just like funny things that you would talk about with friends in a way that is not as performative as typical rom-coms. And then of course, humorously, that movie ends with a movie within a movie. He turns his situation with this unrequited love into a film, and in the film his characters are played by who was in it? Nia Long, Lauryn Hill, Mekhi Phifer, Shamar Moore. So there's this sort of like funny play. Shamar Moore I think Shamar Moore plays his character actually. And so I think it's not perfect, but I think it's worth watching in this sort of, because I see her. Reason why I'm mentioning that is we're naming sort of like Baumbach and Greta and like that other dude, and even sort of like Robert Altman, but and Nancy Myers. And so there's this rich tradition of, white filmmakers who've been able to sort of like, travel this certain path and develop certain aesthetics and certain little fiefdoms of the genre. But I do think there were Black filmmakers who were working with this kind of palette around the same time, but weren't able to get the same sort of notoriety. So that's why I bring that film up. I think it's worth watching. But
shout out John Singleton too. I mean, he's just
exactly.
as important at coloring the landscape for our cinema as Spike and
Justice, and Kim Whitley was also in Baby Boy, which I didn't realize. But yeah, I think there was, and I think there's also, I think growing up with my parents really loved like early 90s screwball comedies, like Steve Martin and Goldie Hawn, and I think this, like Tyler was saying, like my sister had the same reaction. She texted me while she was watching. She was like, "Why are they doing this? who would go on a weekend like this? What are they doing? What is happening? And I thought about that too, and I was like, I don't know, but like, it did remind me of these screwball comedies where the premises were absurd, and they were almost like improv prompts, where it's just like, here's the thing, let's see them squirm. Like the one I saw recently, House Sitter with Goldie Hawn and Steve Martin, just wild premise where Steve Martin hooks up with Goldie Hawn as a waitress, and he's engaged to someone else, never intends on seeing her again, leaves a sketch of this house that he's building for his future wife out in the country, and she just goes there and scams the whole town into believing that she's his wife, who's like putting together this homestead while he's not there, and hilarity ensues. Makes no sense, but I enjoy those films because there's a certain, like you said, there's a certain airiness to them. It creates this sort of interesting, although clearly contrived, playscape for these two brilliant comedians to just do whatever they want. And there are echoes of that in The Weeknd, even though I will still agree in a sense with Tyler in that I think there was a certain lack of motivation in the plot that I would have also liked a little bit more. But it did remind me of those sort of like comedies that are just funny to watch because they're funny to watch.
And on that airiness, it's interesting because, like you mentioned, Dominic, you mentioned Medicine for Melancholy, and like just sort of, I think we're not used to seeing Black people just be, you know, and there's always sort of a weight, to like a lot of these films, and if you really kind of dig into them, you're like, oh God, like you were saying, Tyler, that like, yeah, a lot of them are really depressing, and there's this undercurrent that like I think goes to the point that like being Black, or it makes a point almost that being Black is always the most difficult experience,
right
level, and it always feels like there's this heaviness. And I love that there's just a Black woman who's just like, you know what, messy hair, messy eye makeup, and my dad's shirt, like, just a mess. And that these people weren't really doing anything in particular other than having lots of conversations, like we've seen in white films so many times, before. And that sort of thing of mentioning like Woody Allen, it's like, it's very Woody Allen. And when Spike Lee emerged, he was the Black Woody Allen, and that's what he was called, the Black Woody
literally
Allen.
called that.
Yeah. And so it's like, rarely though are we ever just allowed to sort of be. And even Spike Lee, I mean, they're so heavy. Even Spike Lee at his lightest is just hitting.
He's so heavy-handed. I feel like he gets more heavy-handed the older he gets, honestly.
Spike's also not very funny. I think that's
and he's
very
not
important.
funny. I didn't think She's Gonna Have It was funny at all, but
School Days is hilarious. Is
that's
that a
true.
joke?
I haven't seen that one. Actually.
I think School Days is definitely his hand is sort of like camp, and it does land, but I don't know that's his doing. I think Spike's. I'll throw that back. I do, obviously he has a hand in it. I do think he has a sense of like visual timing, but I think he gets in his way the most when he tries to write too much of his films, I think.
No, he's not a writer.
I think that's the main thing.
Do the right thing. That was his story. Else.
I mean, it's funny we ended up talking about Spike because I think DeWanda Wise, who plays Margot and is really good at it, she's in the reboot for She's Gotta Have It. So that's an interesting callback. Just real quick, I want to read a quote from Stella McGee. She says in an interview, I love romance, I love comedy, so I always lean that way. But all I care about is Black people being themselves and their existential struggle on camera. I want Black women to be just fully formed. We're not one thing or another. We're not aggressive or weak. We're human. We're many things. I always just try to make them human and specific to who we are. That speaks a lot to kind of what y'all were talking about and what you connected to with the film.
I love that. I love that. And I wish, not wish, I know that more Black filmmakers are doing that. You mentioned Channing earlier, and although it's about like a working class Black family in Dallas or in Fort Worth, let me be specific. It's important to us. It's still so much about like this young girl who like just wants to have a boyfriend. She doesn't want to be in a pageant. She just like wants to be a kid. But I also think that like we can have Black folks just being themselves, fully themselves, like multifaceted, and still just as a stickler on dramatic output have conflict. And conflict is not necessarily like an argument, or it's not necessarily like you have to do this, or the weight of the world is going to land on you, or your lights are going to get turned off, or a bad thing is going to happen. Just conflicts between two people in a scene, which I think is why we really, all of us are so drawn to the mom and daughter scenes, because it isn't an argument like so much of the movie is. It's just like, oh, these are two people who want two different things on opposite sides, and they're trying to meet at each other in the middle, but they keep, missing each other. So I think I really love The Weeknd, and I want to watch it again. I think it's visually super stunning.
Really
Wherever
pretty.
in Canada they are is gorgeous. And I'm glad that they're Canadian. That's fun.
I actually read that they shot a lot of that in Malibu, of all places.
It looks like Malibu wine country, actually, now that you mentioned that. But it was beautiful. But I can be critical a little bit, but I do want to just a little bit more conflict, and not necessarily a conflict in the premise, but conflict amongst the characters.
Right.
Or just even, I don't know, like and maybe this would be a challenge for the director and the actor to rise to, is that more nuanced conflict of the inner conflict. You know what I mean? Because I feel like, our favorite films have like this very heavy-handed conflict, right? Like we're racing to this wedding, or we're having, it's just very heavy-handed on it, it's constantly hit on. But the inner conflict of what I want is so clearly in contradiction of what I actually need. And how that's played out is a testament to how good of a director it is, and how good of an actor it is, and what the ensemble looks like. And I feel like that getting to hit that nuance is so specific, and when you teeter too far to the right or to the left, it falls apart. And that's why I feel like the directors that can do that nuanced inner conflict so well, they shine, and they're able to continue success. And it's not just like a one-hit, wonder director kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Which I think is why I hate to say it, Annie Hall works, and so many of
I was gonna say it, but I was just like, that's why his movies work, because he's able to like.
A lot of his other films don't work though, because he's doing the reality thing. But I think Annie Hall does the his conflict is not with Annie. Like, she's a person who's living a life, and he sort of just like busts into her life, and she's like, I'm a person, I have things I want to do. His conflict is with himself, because he as a kid lived underneath a roller coaster, and he has like no sense of home, and he doesn't feel like he's good enough for anything, and he's a failing comedian. So that's why he keeps bumping up against it. A lot of his other work doesn't work because he has to put himself in his films, and it's all him and his clearly
I guess the women in his work,
but Annie Hall works because the conflict is not even between the two of them. It's what you're talking about. It's that inner conflict of him so obviously hating himself, and not just to be funny or self-deprecating, literally hating himself.
Now that I think about it, The Weeknd was actually very Rohmer-esque. I think for me, still, Eric Rohmer he is just a master of like that dialogue that goes nowhere, and yet it expounds so much, right? Like, it's just like, wait, you guys have only been talking about coffee, but yet I feel like there has been this existential thing that you have touched on. You know what I mean?
There's another interview I read with her.
Sorry?
Yeah, no, go ahead. But there's, just to interject quickly, like she specifically names Eric Romer as one of her influences.
Really, I totally got.
So you can kind of see that. Along with Tamara Jenkins, who did Slums of Beverly Hills, like she lists those as two of her major influences.
That's funny.
Yeah, go ahead.
With Eric Romer, and I kind of like, I saw this when I was in college of how he would always do this thing with threes. Three people. When you put three people into any environment, it's not like chaos ensues, but there's like they all rub up against each other's internal wants, needs, and desires in these very interesting and nuanced ways, where after that summer or after that weekend on the boat, they've all just become like irreversibly changed and yet still the same. Like he does it in such a nuanced way. Like he's, to me, like a master in that kind of like, does he even have a movie maybe called Weekend? Maybe, I don't know, but it's like Midnight at Maud's. It's probably. Like same. It's actually
Summer's Tale.
It's always like summer this, fall this, midnight here. La Collectionista is like a summer getaway. So he does that interesting thing with time too, where he gives you this beginning, like this is when it's going to begin, this is when it ends, and all of the action is going to, I don't know, like that's just a very succinct way of laying out a premise and then just inserting 2 to 3, I would say 3 characters. He does well with 3. And so
I think that's dead on. There is a certain there's a certain play-like quality. It's almost like it's set up like an escape room. like here you go. Let's see if y'all can get out of this. And my favorite scene, the sort of climactic scene that you weren't really sure it's just I guess it's more of a sequence where they're all just walking in the fields, and there's soft cuts, and they all switch and talk to one another, to different people. They interchange roaming shots. There's foreground and background. I just think it's beautifully shot, and the pacing is quiet. It's almost like there's this sort of like Eye of the Storm thing where they've sort of stepped into this realm that doesn't exist in our time, and also almost doesn't exist in the film's time. It's almost like they're frozen for a second while they're figuring things out. And sort of obviously it ends with the climax of Margot being like, you know what, I'm about to bounce, this is whack. So but there's this sense in which that I think that scene does a really good, or that sequence does a really good job of distilling the film's actions and tensions. Again, there maybe could be more explication, but to these sort of like just conversations, these roaming conversations in which there's sort of like each teasing out little entanglements of this big knot and figuring out where they stand, and each telling each other simple truths or avoiding truths. Some of the shots reminded me a lot of Before Sunrise, and the sort of like long conversation, uncut conversations that may or may not be productive, but they sort of move the action along in this way that's almost meditative. I don't know what y'all thought about that sequence, but that was, even having seen it the first time a couple of years ago, and seeing it again, it's still my favorite sequence in the movie.
I think it's my favorite too. I think it does the best job. I'm glad you mentioned that sometimes it's play-like, and I'm not even saying this just as a playwright, but I'm super interested in where it's in theater we call it closed space, closed time, meaning like it all happens in real time while you're sitting there instead of like time moving along. But especially in plays or films about couples, what you're waiting for is the switch up. How can you get all the different combinations, and then what do those conversations beget? And I feel like that sequence did such a good job. And I think describing it as being out of space and time is accurate, because it does sort of like veer away from what we understand as logical, like how would these two people end up in this combination. But it doesn't matter at this point, because it's the third act and we need it to happen. And it's beautiful. I think that's the most beautiful sequence in the whole film, which is helpful. And all of the conversations, I feel like they're paced so well, because all the expository work is already done. There's no information that we need to know other than the climactic moment when we find out about the engagement, but we already know about the ring. So the work, the like heavy lifting has already been done. So we just literally need to see these two people together to figure out like exactly what's going to happen. So I think that's actually like one of the most successful sequences in the film, because I have a feeling that she may have written that first.
That actually would make sense.
Yeah, it
and
feels like
worked from there.
Yeah, that's what the whole movie is, it kind of. And then I think she may have like worked outside. It feels like you feel that like writerly excitement, like, oh, I bet she was like loving.
She nailed it. Yeah.
So I did want to say the one thing this I was thinking about, sort of all you guys had said about the character of Zadie, and it reminded me like her foil would be like, do you remember, I don't know if you saw it or anything, but The Incredible Jessica James?
I didn't see it. I came up a lot when I was reading about this, but I didn't quite get around to it.
And that sort of, again, like, you know, it's, in a way, it's a Black woman who's so into herself. Like in this one, like, there's this self-loathing.
She's like, take it or leave it. I don't know.
Yeah. Here I am. What? That kind of thing. But yeah, in that, you have a woman who's so into herself and her art and is so incredibly passionate. I love, though, that about both of those films, and that, again, we're seeing sort of this new, approach to romance applied to Black people and Black faces, and Black women getting to be very different than, the sort of having it all together, Mary Jane characters. So
just like a more relatable heroine.
Mm-hmm.
Heroine. Is that?
Yeah.
Why is that weird? Okay, sorry.
Same word, different things.
But yeah, I think it's sort of this, we have like a new generation of, Black images and ways to be. And that I'm most excited about. And when I was watching it, I was just like, this character is kind of foul. Like, it's foul, you're foul. But it is this sort of, she's kind of a garbage person, but there are two people who want to like hoard that garbage, That's what's best about that movie. It's just like, yeah, even she gets loved too. And this idea, though, that it really puts out there this idea that all Black women, you don't have to like have it together to deserve love.
For sure.
Absolutely.
You can be a struggling comedian. You can be, you can have your hair all kinds of ways, and you can still deserve love. And that's,
her hair was perfect. The whole film, her hair was perfect.
Her hair was impeccable.
It was amazing.
It made me so angry. I love reading bad reviews, by the way, of Black films. But this review by some dude, what was his name? I mentioned in the article, but it's on Roger Ebert's posthumous website. And he basically says it like, Zadie, he hates the film. He says Zadie's character is sour and her Debbie Downer routine is flat. And, he says Aubrey's like maddeningly chipper, and he's either in denial about how hurtful she is, or he's just an underdeveloped love interest. He says a lot of main things. The thing that annoyed me the most was he made reference to Zadie's asymmetrical haircut, and I was like, who do you think you are? Her hair's literally perfect the entire film. This guy's clearly white, but I think there's a sense in which the way that there's just always a difference between the way we see these films and the way other people do. And I think what is so powerful about romantic comedies on multiple levels, both financially, because, rom-coms, the rise of Black rom-coms came about because of the rise in mainstream rom-coms, where people realized that they made stars. They made Cameron Diaz's. They were also, particularly when these people became stars, and they realized, oh, maybe we can't necessarily afford her. So that's kind of how they ended up making Black romantic comedies, because you can make a ton of money on a tiny budget. And so they got, I think rom-coms have gotten Hollywood through some kind of lean times before superhero movies took off. And Black romantic comedies in particular were making a lot of money. And then the drop off was really severe. But I think they also, and I made this comparison article too. It's a lot like how shows like Living Single and Martin and Girlfriends got network television through a primetime drought for a long time, and then they were just completely dismissed once they got over it, and once they moved into teen programming or whatever. But the other thing that makes rom-com so powerful is that it communicates to larger culture who is deserving of love. And that is connected to, particularly with regard to Black women, is connected to who's deserving of protection, who's deserving of safety, who's deserving of success, and due just reward. I mean, I think there's something. One of the things that, again, I mentioned in the piece, and that I'm always frustrated by is just the pure by the numbers comparison for how long it takes white female actresses to launch into the stratosphere versus how long it takes your Regina Kings, Regina Halls. Viola Davis just went viral in an interview where she just pointedly said, is like, I'm almost having EGOT and I'm still not on the industry level as Meryl Streep. And I've been in films with Meryl Streep. I've stolen scenes from Meryl Streep, and they're still not on the same level. And all of these women I mentioned are 48, 36. And if you compare, I was looking up someone like Emma Stone's IMDb. She had at least, I counted, 8 leading roles before she turned 30. And, Lupita Nyong'o didn't have a leading role. Even 6 years after 12 Years a Slave, she didn't have a leading role till Us, and she was already in her 30s. Granted, she started acting a little bit late, but it's still the difference is stark. And so I think rom-coms, more than a lot of genres, have this ability to influence the way America thinks about class and aspiration, and who's worthy of credit and who's not. And so I think that's why I in this first iteration of this series, I definitely wanted to talk about it, because it is a cultural earworm in a sense. Do you guys have any other thoughts about the genre itself?
I think rom-com is a very great way for many actors and actresses to just get their chops in terms of like pacing, in terms of like, there's not as much pressure as like an action film or a heavy drama or a period drama or whatever. Like a comedy, like rom-coms are really like these like light and fluffy, like, ways to deal with relationship dynamics, pacing, what else? Narrative, sorry, like there's like shit in the background. And the fact that you're right, a lot of Black women aren't able to have access to that earlier in their careers, it does prolong their it does put their success off, because all of the like white women who I see as like Jennifer Lawrence, Emma Stone, Natalie Portman, a few others, that is how they built their audience too. Rom-coms are super universal. Love is universal. And so that's how they built their audiences, to then position themselves to get that action film, to get into the MCU universe, to get into that like weird high stakes thriller or whatever. So it is a great audience builder universally, that we don't have as much access to as white women. So I think I'm going to do more of my part in supporting, Black rom-coms, because I hadn't heard of this film before you told me about it. And I can't say that I was looking, if I'll be honest, I was being a bit lazy in terms of being a viewer, and just, again, like whatever's on Netflix or Hulu or whatever, like whatever pops up on my queue is what I kind of tend to click on. So, you know, that's what I can do as a viewer, to seek out and to speak out about just like these slice of life films that inevitably build people's careers. Adam Driver is the perfect example of this. Like, who would have, like, what's his little Ren Kylie?
Like instant Rilo kid. It's Rilo.
Yes, sorry.
Something.
Sorry.
I really want to see him in Rilo Kiley. That's
Yeah, that would be a whole other thing. Rilo Kiley
yeah,
biopic.
that's a band, right?
Cool. Yeah.
Sorry.
Also led by an actress.
Wait, which one?
Isn't that Jenny? What's her name's band?
Yeah,
She's like child actress. Beverly Hills Troop.
Troop Beverly Hills.
Troop Beverly Hills. Yeah, there you go.
Troop Beverly Hills. Yeah.
I'm really excited that like films like The Weeknd exist, and hopefully more films like it can continue to be greenlit and supported and produced, and get wide distribution, which is important. And then also thinking about like television shows like Insecure or I May Destroy You or P-Valley, which is showing this idea of Black women not necessarily having to bear the weight of what it means to be Black in America, so that because we now are in a place where we have a few more opportunities to see ourselves on screen, we don't have to be the one representation. But I think also rom-coms work as this very particular method of image production. Like you were saying, Graham, it like explains to people who are essentially desirable. And it's not just for Black folks, it's for all folks. So I think of like Kate Hudson, which you mentioned her mom earlier. Goldie Hawn sort of passed the torch to Kate Hudson, and she is was for a very long time the rom-com queen. And I think of something like How to Win a Guy in 10 Days, which I think is probably the main source for Gone Girl's Cool Girl monologue, which is about like this perfect depiction of like what a white desirable woman can be. Is like someone who enjoys sports, someone who is fuckable, someone like all these things that a person cannot be at one time.
Of course.
But I think in a lot of ways that image production for Black folks is a lot more detrimental because we don't have 500 other films to go to in the same weekend. So when I think of something like Think Like a Man, that's very detrimental, but it was super successful.
Because we all had to watch it.
We all had to go see it. And that became a model. Think Like a Man was immensely successful, and that became a model and actually launched a lot of careers out of Think Like a Man, or relaunched a lot of careers. And it's a super harmful film. It's harmful information to pass off to Black folks, specifically women. It's just dripped in misogynoir. So I think I'm not saying that Black filmmakers have to be careful, because I think this idea, like James Baldwin talked before about like having the white man on his shoulder that he has to put away when he writes. The idea that there has to be this like the Black community on your shoulder while you're writing shouldn't exist, but that there just should be more opportunity. So a film like The Weeknd can exist in a canon, so you can actually create a canon and not just talk about Spike Lee. So that hopefully 20 years when someone is, in 20 years when someone podcast or whatever is hot, then I don't know what they'll be doing, a TikTok or whatever TikTok will be.
TikTok Live.
TikTok Live. There'll be there'll be more people to talk about than just Spike Lee or John Singleton. There'll be more Black women to talk about. There'll be more all types of Black directors, filmmakers to discuss, because we would have created a canon that exists in wide array.
The idea of this sort of canon and the images that we see and we don't see, it's always interesting to me, because like as someone who, I program, and I'm looking at films all the time and thinking of the idea of the canon. And when we talk about sort of Black film and media just in general, those things exist, but then we just forget them. And it's always interesting to me. It's like UPN was all black.
Yeah.
It was all black. You know, UPN, Fox for a period of time, even the WB had several black shows. And then that period comes to an end, and it seems as if, like, you know, then it was like we just didn't have, it was like a barren wasteland.
Yeah.
And like Insecure came around, you know? Like, I think there's a tendency for, and this is actually a critique of Black culture. I think there's a tendency for us to sort of, we need that validation of Hollywood. We need that stamp of approval, and we need it constantly. And when it's not there, we can sometimes have a tendency to discredit our own work and our own progress. And whenever it's like, you think of all of these amazing Black films that have been around for a long time, and we forget them as well, you know?
We do.
It's, you know, and in terms of Black indies, it's like there are filmmakers doing amazing work, and then we just like, oh, well, it's cheap.
Exactly.
You know, it wasn't on the Netflix, I missed it, you know? And we have to hunt for those things.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's not just, you know, the outside and Hollywood, it's us destroying our own canon. And I always find that very interesting. The idea of
just not preserving it.
Or just outright, I think, destroying our own canon at times. You know, it's like there are films and TV shows. It's like, you know, I grew up watching Girlfriends. I shouldn't have, but I was watching Girlfriends when I was a kid, you know? And like, you can barely find that show for a long time. It's now on DVD. You can't find Moesha. You know?
Yeah, that's insane.
Like Sister. Why is Sister not streaming?
I honestly, it makes me upset, but I can't. It's true. I mean, I think with all this proliferation of streaming services, in programming this virtual series, it's like I was instantly so constrained by the lack of Black films available on the internet. And it's wild. And so it stings a little bit when we hear so many sort of like white majority voices talk about like, film is so democratic now. You can shoot some of your iPhone and it's instantly available. And it's just like, well, then where are our movies? Like, you guys are digging up all of these movies that a lot of people don't even want to see. And like you said, it's like our canon is kind of disappeared somewhere in someone's weird closet or who knows where. And I think there is this sense, you know, it's a lot like fashion. So, you know, I think some of us, and maybe I'm just speaking for ourselves, like there was a moment in the early 2000s where I was just kind of over it. And I was like, this is getting kind of gaudy. This is getting kind of corny. Like Sean John maybe lost its way, but like you grow up and you see things in new contexts, and you realize, you also sort of are forced to realize what white people are stealing from our past and from our archives. And it's not just like, oh, now I appreciate it. It's more like, oh my God, this, in some ways, the appreciation of those things was stolen from me by this sense of shame that I'm always supposed to feel about Black culture. Like I was always supposed to feel like Moesha was cheesy and low budget. And it was like, yeah, it was low budget. It shouldn't have been low budget because there's some really good work on that show. And there are some really talented actors whose prime was essentially buried in this sort of like weird syndication wormhole because white America just didn't think that we were relatable. And so I think, you know, part of this idea in this series is reclaiming that, and, you know, both, you know, critiquing ourselves for disregarding our canon and sort of forgiving ourselves because some of it's some stuff that we were dealing with that we didn't really know.
And on that idea of shame though too, is that, you know, that idea also of Black Hollywood, you know, talking about like Viola Davis and, you know, but even the Nia Longs, you know, Black Pack, you know, the Sanaz, all of these actors and actresses that, you know, they wouldn't have been able to do what they did had it not been for Black film and Black filmmakers.
Absolutely.
And writers and producers, you know, and so we kind of also exist in this very separate world. And as someone who often, you know, I operate in white very, very white spaces, you know, and you find yourself unable to sort of go like, oh yeah, let's talk about, you know,
yes
talk about, you know, brown sugar. Like, we can't bond. I can't bond with, like, you know, my white friend over brown sugar. That's not happening. You know?
Exactly.
And so there is this sort of, especially as those films often depict like this black middle class, they appeal to a lot of us and have like molded us in a way. It's interesting that we then sort of run from them or hide from them, or, you know, feel this sort of sense of like, I can't share that. I can't talk about that.
Right.
That's a little too black, you know.
Yeah,
it's a little
exactly.
You know, and that was what was interesting about in talking about like The Weeknd, is that it's not particularly very black. You know, it's like black people, but like I could instantly, like, I don't know, I could white out everyone,
right,
and just like, you know, replace them, and you wouldn't think anything of it, you know. And I think it speaks to sort of the time that we're in and a different black identity, and what it means to be black now isn't the same as it was, you know, 20 years ago at the height of, you know, the black romantic comedy. But I don't know what that means exactly for us, but I think that, you know, we're more visible than, you know, we have been. I don't know about more visible than ever.
right.
Media, but, you know, we kind of come in, we go out, and much like fashion, you know, and right now it's very hot to be black. And so if you're a black creator, you know, it's a great shine for you. But it's also a thing that I feel like a certain amount of fear as well, because it's like, well, when's it go out?
Absolutely. When's the other shoe drop?
You know, the clock ticking. Yeah.
That idea of shame is really interesting too. I think also, having come recently from a writing program at NYU, which is probably the stuffiest film program you could come from, this idea of shame around the black canon is so real. And there's only a certain type of black film that is appreciated as a film and not as some sort of exploitation film. Even if it's not black exploitation, they would probably call Friday an exploitation film. Although it's literally the creation of a true auteur. Like, we don't regard Ice Cube as an auteur, although he most definitely is. Created
literally a mogul.
I mean, Friday had how many iterations? 5, 6. It's still going. They're trying to reboot it.
I mean, it's the same premise of Slackers. Sorry, I just wanted to throw that out there. Like, everyone fucking goes off about Slackers.
1000%.
Yeah, I think
and
there's
Kevin
this.
Smith is annoying.
Very annoying. I think there's this huge shame around what is appropriate to reference. Even actually, I thought about it in The Weeknd, because she references like Fellini and Godard. Like, it's someone else. Yeah, and I'm like, oh, that's an interesting film reference. It felt like, you know, a filmmaker putting her hand in to say, you know, this is referencing in this moment. And sometimes it can be a little snobby, but you can never be a snob and reference a black filmmaker unless it's like Oscar Micheaux, because very few people know who he is. But most of us haven't seen Oscar Micheaux films anyway. But again, because of a lack of access. But there's this true shame around saying that, you know, these are my foundational films. I mean, I experienced that shame in the theater as well. Like, to say, like, the first play I ever went to was a Tyler Perry play. Like, that is shocking. But that's true. That was what was available to me. That was what was near me. Those are the things that my family wanted to see. I will watch Medea Goes to Jail, the play, to this day and laugh. But there's this shame around what we create as our tastes. And white people are allowed to have eclectic taste. They just call it camp. But we can't have eclectic taste because it's low budget, like we talked about earlier, or it's not well made, or it's bad for the culture, or whatever. And so it unfortunately, it's the influence of the white gaze because I feel like without it, we just watch whatever we want to watch and consume what we want to consume and just talk amongst each other.
Exactly.
And that shame wouldn't exist. Maybe we would disagree over what we like and dislike, but unfortunately it does, especially in artistic, academic realms, for sure.
Right.
Black art is seen as lesser art.
Yeah.
Always.
Ultimately.
I think it's really interesting that like Steve McQueen jumps out at me. He's like one of my favorite directors. Black, white, doesn't matter. He's like one of my favorite because his relationship to Fassbender is like one of my favorite relationships to see play out on screen. Like I think Hunger is one of the best films in the past like 10, maybe 12 years. I can't remember how long it's been. But I mean, I know just through like T from the industry that he like had done these 3 films. I think he did Hunger, Shame, and then maybe one other film before 12 Years a Slave. But he was just like, why is no one saying my name really in like America? Like, why is like no one like just going the fuck off about me because I'm so awesome? And he was like, oh, I have to make a slave film to get an Oscar, I guess. Or like I have to make something that's more palatable because they're not going to give me an Oscar nomination for Hunger or for Shame, which he should have gotten, I think, for Hunger. So he intentionally made a film about a slave narrative, which I
can tell that it was intentional. My God, I'm sorry, I hate 12 Years a Slave, but you can tell that it was intentional. It
was just very intentional.
Yeah,
he knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted to gain, access, reward, validation from like the elite, and he knew exactly what buttons to push. And it's just very. It still rubs in the wrong way that like, yes, we can say paint as boldly as you want to, be as colorful as you want to. I mean, he's British, and he was very fine with like doing Hunger and Shame, and I would have watched whatever came after that too. But even he kind of succumbed to what he kind of knew was like white people's hot buttons for like what they were going to give us validation for. So like, I obviously think that we all should keep doing whatever the heck we want to do. But there's still just a very real thing that like only a few key people hold the keys in Hollywood as to like what's going to get widespread attention, what's going to be put into like history books. Because like 12 Years a Slave is put into history books and it's taught and it's shown. Hunger and Shame are not. You know what I mean? And so I don't know what to do about that kind of real power. Real equity is what I kind of talk about. Equity is really important to me because we can be as colorful as we want to. It doesn't fucking matter if like we don't get the distribution and we don't get those, we don't get like, the whites talking about it to their friends. You know what I mean? Like we got to go and support this Black filmmaker because like, you know what I mean?
No, of course.
So I don't know what the answer is to that, but
yeah.
Shout out Steve McQueen. I do love him.
I do like him.
I think there's in terms of that sort of, again, it's that like we need that Hollywood, that Hollywood attention and like approval
and money.
Yeah,
and money. Yeah.
And with something like The Weeknd, it just showed up on Hulu, but it's like that film came out like
a long time ago.
I didn't know about
it. For film timelines, it came out a long time ago, and it debuted. It had 2 separate debuts at festivals. I think one was Tribeca, and then I saw it the following year when it debuted. Then it not debut, obviously, but it screened at South by, and it still really didn't get major distribution. It did allow her because she did everything, which is kind of a big budget movie with Amandla Sternberg. And then that kind of allowed her to do The Photograph, which got a wider release. But The Weeknd ended up just being her passion project. What are you saying?
The Photograph, which also kind of came and went.
Yeah. It had a big release, but it kind of got overshadowed by a few films. And I think Stella McGee is interesting because I think she has the potential to be, she already is in a sense one of the few Black women, maybe Ava DuVernay, who's in this big budget studio space. And however she got there, I have full confidence that she's going to just utilize it to the best of her ability. And I think she has another projects, and, you know, talking about the tandems, I think filmmakers need someone they can rely on. I think that's actually become Issa Rae for her. I think she has another Issa Rae picture, who I give massive credit. I think her progress as a performer from season 1 to whatever the latest season was of Insecure has been, don't worry about that, my camera's being weird. But I think has been actually really impressive to watch. But that's just a side note. But I think genre film, and why I wanted to focus on it, is it is so hard for Black filmmakers to be taken seriously as genre films, even after they have a genre hit. You know, you talk about Steve McQueen, who I think is one of the best genre filmmakers on the planet. I thought Widows was incredible. I think some of Spike Lee's best work is in genre film. There's Ernest Dickerson, who I think The Juice is a genre film. There's Devil in a Blue Dress. Spike Lee made tons of money with Inside Man, and they still wouldn't give Greenlight a sequel. So Spike has a lot of bitter opinions, and some of that comes from the fact that he's been locked out of some of the things that his work should entitle him to, and he keeps having to return to these polemics to get people's attention. So I think in that sense it is a battleground, and I'm excited that a lot of these young, there seems to be a new wave of like Michaela Coel. Like, I think I'll just end up saying how much I love and May Destroy You on every episode. It's one of the best things I've ever seen. But I think, with Donald Glover in Atlanta and what Jordan Peele's doing, there are these new wave of auteurs who, and Terrence Nance, who are making these brilliant genre-busting pieces of work. And my excitement is always tempered, like you said, by waiting for the shoe to drop. Where like, so if this is this sort of what gets white Hollywood's attention, is this going to be used as a stick to beat other filmmakers who are doing less overtly groundbreaking work, who are still displaying a similar level of craft but in simpler frameworks? Is this going to be? Do you have to make a random acts of flyness to get people's attention?
Right. It's like, do you have to be these like all encompassing outdoors,
everything all in once?
like
Exactly.
Donald Glover can literally do everything, and I'm like, that's just too much pressure.
Yeah, I feel like what I'm super admiring about Terrence Nance, first of all, he's from Dallas.
Yeah, shout out.
But also, I think that he like never left behind his vision, which I think like is maybe what happened with like the Space Jam debacle. But it is fascinating to me that after an oversimplification of her beauty, which he was lauded for having such a singular image and having this like laser focus, this is a new genre we've never seen before. He's like melding Afrofuturism with this thing and this thing.
And Jay-Z's support too.
I think an oversimplification got released 2012, 2013, and like we've not seen a follow-up from what we know. Like there's probably something that's coming. I know he's been working in other things. He just did something with a designer, I think. But I think that they are disciplined for saying that I'm going to stay true to exactly what I want to do, and that there are concessions that you have to make. Like, who's to say Stella actually wanted to make everything, but she had to make that film to prove that she could handle a budget so that she can make another thing. Like, everyone doesn't get to be Ava and make Selma for their first big budget film and continue to do whatever they want after that. So I think, unfortunately, if you want to play the Hollywood game, you have to play the Hollywood game. Yeah. And Spike's been like playing it, but also talking shit on the sidelines.
So much.
Yeah, so he's the one who gets to do both, but they still, punish him. Like he talks about constantly. With Five Bloods, he didn't get to get aging the way that Marty got aging on Irishman. So the game of it all, the business of it all is what's so disheartening to me.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a very rigged game. I mean, not to end on a downer note, but I mean, we don't have any events. No, not at all. I'm totally facetious. I don't think that's a downer at all. I think there is a lot of hopefulness in this in this conversation in terms of, you know, the potential, not just for the genre, but for,
Yeah.
I think there is a unique potential in this genre for good reasons and sexist reasons for women filmmakers and filmmakers of color to really stake out some territory, whether or not that's a stepping stone or whether or not it's just like, we're still waiting for our version of Nancy Meyers, not in the sense that I don't really like Nancy Meyers, but just in the sense of how many damn movies she's been able to make. That's all. That's honestly all I want. I want someone, at least one person before I leave Earth, to be able to have a catalog as long as someone like that, which is, to me, it's just like, that's the key, really. It's just like, how do you make it to the next one and the next one and the next one, so people remember you, and so you can practice. Like, so much of Black excellence is like, you know, you see it with hip hop too. It's like, there's a reason why people's first albums are like, oh, this is amazing. It's because they've been like waiting for so long. And when you don't get that follow-up, you don't get to get better. You don't get to get a lot of your bad ideas out of the way. And so there's got to be space for that. And I think it's growing, but we got to be forceful about it sometimes.
That is the one limit I think I have with, you know, with being a director, is that, you know, these are like long form, long gestational projects that require, like, I wish I could be in my bedroom like a musician and just do all the things and then just have like my own mixtape like at the end of the week and just post it on SoundCloud and like pay like my, like, you know, Spotify fee and like keep going and like, you know what I mean? But it requires so much of community and so much more resources than like other art forms. Absolutely. And so I think that's why we kind of like lag behind in the discussion of filmmakers rather than like musicians, right? Like we're always at the forefront of like music, and I think that's why fashion videos and music videos, and like I think of like I went down like a Hype Williams wormhole last night again, right? Like and just
happens
how
every month.
It's like some witching hour where I'm like, I have to watch all the Hype Williams like videos again, and how like he used that to cut his teeth. And even after Belly, you know, whether, I don't know if this was, I can't imagine him not wanting to make another film, but whether, I don't know if he stepped away willingly or if he just couldn't get something made, but
I have no idea.
It was very poignant when I heard that Spielberg's DP, he had a story and he said that Spielberg had seen a shot that Hype Williams did in one of his music videos, and he used that shot in Saving Private Ryan.
Oh my God.
And I was just like, and I, obviously people, like filmmakers use other filmmakers' work all the time, but to not give, for Spielberg to not have given Hype Williams that just like really tiny shout out, that could have like catapulted him. Absolutely. You know what I mean? Like just any shout out from Spielberg could have catapulted him. And the fact that like we're learning about this decades later from the DP, just like offhand, like just off comment, like, you know, pouring coffee, whatever in the interview, by the way, is so egregious. You know what I mean?
It really is. Yeah.
It's so offensive. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, it's just like those little shout outs, those stepping stools, as casual and flippant as it might be to like a white director, there are huge and like monumental for us, you know?
And like Jasmine was saying, there's this thirst for validation, but it's not entirely self-generated. It comes from being gaslighted and from white Hollywood intentionally withholding validation in order to maintain power. And so that's this idea of just like, you know, you see it in all industries. It's like, we're on everyone's mood board, but no one will admit it because then they'd have to pay us and they don't want to do that. So,
and that's the thing, validation very much equals money. Like, cause like if Spielberg would have said that comment, that means less money maybe for, someone's gonna have to pay him for this new movie. And so they just kind of keep quiet about it because no one wants the money to leave them. You know what I mean? Filmmakers, I think across the board have this scarcity mentality of like, well, I got to make this one, but can I make another one? Even white, like you'll see all these white men interviews about like, oh, I thought this was gonna be my last film, and I had to mortgage my house and and it's like Scorsese saying this, or Coppola with his wine farm, or whatever.
My God. That whole clan, I can't, honestly. As much as I admire some of the work, I'm just like, it's a cabal of hoarding.
But I feel like
there's a lot of clout.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that hoarding mentality is very rampant in the film industry, because it's also a question of time. Yeah. Time for us does not work the same as time for musicians or time for what other industry?
Any other painters?
Really, any
other art medium. It's different.
Truly, time is money, and the biology of time. A lot of filmmakers are like, how many films can I make realistically in my lifetime? A lot of filmmakers
I don't know.
Like, yeah, Tarantino gets to decide that he wants to make 10 and then retire. And, like, we can have these Bergman collections, right, of like these boxes of Bergman. And I'm just like, I want us to have our collection sets too. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I may not see that, but I may not see that in my lifetime, but I want that for our future.
Yeah, we need
box sets, you guys. Criterion collection sets.
Yeah, I'm sure you can get the Malcolm D. Lee box set. He's about the only one who's made over.
He's got one. I like. He's got that whole. Tyler Perry's on a whole thing.
Yes, if you want Tyler Perry.
I like Malcolm's work. I think he has a great sweet spot. Well, I don't know if anyone has any other thoughts, but this was amazing. Y'all killed it. Thank you for coming. Before we go, we'll go around the room, and does anyone have any projects they want to promo, any socials they want to get out? You want to start with Jasmine?
I got no projects to promote. Movie theaters are
just
closed.
My stuff. Yeah, movie theaters are closed. Okay, cool. Done.
If anyone wants to give me work, don't hate the player.
Love it. Send her an email.
Yes.
I think for me, anyone and everyone can find me on Instagram like everyone else, and it's just Dom G Jones, and that's kind of where I just post all the little randoms, all the random things. The DMs are open for nice things, comments only, obviously.
Yes. Nice DMs, all the randoms. Nice DMs. Perfect.
Wholesome DMs only.
Wholesome content.
I have some stuff to plug, but I'm not gonna plug it because like movie theaters are closed as well because of COVID. And I don't want to like block my blessings, so I'm just gonna wait until they open.
That's cool. We'll keep them like that for you. Yeah.
Things. But if someone wants to get in touch and pay me, they can find me on Instagram at Tyler Online. Or I'm the only person in the world with my name. You can just Google me, Tyler English Beck, with my website will come up. There's a contact form. Email me if you're serious about something. Otherwise, don't waste me and Squarespace's time.
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much for coming, Jasmine, Tyler, Dominique, and thank you for listening to Black is Not a Genre. We will be back for our fourth and final week of July. The genre is TBA, but it's going to be good. It's going to be juicy. So thanks again.
Thank you, ladies and guys and everyone. Thank you.